Spoiler warning ahead. You're listening to the Geek Speak Radio Show on TalkZone.com. Here's Henry and Romo.
And here we are. Welcome back to the Geek Speak Radio Show. Talking, a really fun talk too. Yeah, talking to Ethan Gilsdorf. He's the author of Fantasy Freaks and Gaming Geeks, an epic quest for reality among role players, online gamers, and other dwellers of imaginary realms. The website for the book is fantasyfreaksbook.com, and all that, like I said, is linked up at our website, geekspeakradioshow.com. We'll take some comments, questions from you guys. If you want to do it live, 888 go for it, 888-463-6748. Comments at geekspeakradioshow.com is the email. Romo, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, hey, Ethan. Nice meeting you. I'm a big fan of your book, Fantasy Freaks and Gaming Geeks. Me personally, I think that we are all geeks. Everybody here living, all human beings, we are all geeks because being a geek is kind of like being a fan. But however, we're just fans of pop culture. Yep. What's it called? What are you a fan of?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I was saying earlier, I think that I'm going to answer your question a little bit differently in that one of the things I thought was very interesting about some of my discussions about how the term geek has changed is that I think what best defines a geek is someone who has always been passionate about something and has always loved something and wanting to get the details right, but before it became popular and then after it's passed from sort of popularity. So there are some people who might become a fan of something for a few years when it's sort of fashionable to do so, but then they move on to the next thing, and I think it's the geeks who kind of keep the torch alive. I am a huge, as I was saying earlier, fan, sort of more with a nostalgic view on all of role-playing game culture that goes back, to the 1970s. I'm very interested in the history of D&D and all the role-playing games and how they came out of Tolkien. I kind of reread the Lord of the Rings every year or two. Definitely make a point of sitting down and watching the movies every year. I have been trying to think of another good example of something that I've just been sort of crazy obsessed about lately. For some reason, I'm drawing a blank. Well, tell me what kinds of stuff are you've been sort of following lately?
I'm waiting for Super 8. A lot of new TV shows, new movies to come out. As being a fanatic of just a lot of superhero movies right now. But are you excited about what's going to happen with the Avengers? The Avengers movie.
I love the various superhero movies. I have to admit that comic book culture was not something that I really participated in a lot as a kid or even as an adult. So I definitely appreciate all the different permutations of the various Marvel and DC superheroes who are now being turned into movies. And what's interesting about it, of course, is that you can almost see it happening. Like every year, they're saying, okay, who's the next? Green Hornet or Green Lantern. Let's do that. Or let's do Wonder Woman. Someone hasn't done Wonder Woman in a long time. But unfortunately, I missed out on that to a certain extent. And I don't know. I have some friends who either they were into D&D or they were into comic books or they were into horror movies. But it was rare that you found someone who was kind of into all three. And I guess D&D kind of just warped me and kind of consumed my consciousness in a way. I think that what's interesting about these various fan communities is that everybody has a kind of a world or a kind of a genre that speaks to them. For some people it's science fiction, it's about the future, it's about technology, it's about imagining what could happen. For others, maybe more like people like me, I'm kind of backward-looking, nostalgic. I love this idea of living in a time before technology, a time before things get all messed up.
Yeah.
So for some people that realm really speaks to them. For other people, they couldn't think of anything more boring than sitting down to watch Lord of the Rings. So it's just a really interesting to see people's differing tastes.
Yeah, it is, and because I grew up with I'm a big comic book collector. I grew up with I'm a comic book geek. And, actually, speaking of Dungeons and Dragons, I actually saw the movie when it came out.
Oh, my God, yeah.
It was bad.
And he can admit that in public.
What do you feel? I mean, for me, when they remake comics into movies, I kind of sometimes I'm upset because I don't want it to be done. And the same thing goes with the same way they did it with Dungeons and Dragons. Do you think there's a sense of
ownership?
Ownership as far as fans have on these things that are being done by when they're turned into movies? Do you think there's something that needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely true about this. People have very, very strong opinions about because of course most of this is stuff that was done as a print medium, either as a comic book or a novel or whatever, and people have their own ideas in their head about sort of what these characters look like and how they should behave and all this other stuff. So every fandom community has very strong opinions about. It happened with Harry Potter as well. People griping about various casting decisions and so on and so forth. I think the problem ultimately is that anytime you adapt something, you're going to you lose something in translation. And there's just something about reading a book or reading a comic book where you have your own version of what goes on. Certainly with comic books, obviously they have a picture of what the superhero does. But everything that happens in between those still images goes on in your head, right? And when it's all sort of done for you in the form of a movie or a TV show, it's a different experience, and it's almost like apples and oranges. While I don't think that one experience is better than the other, I think there's something to be said for the role of the imagination in the consumer or the fan that's very powerful. And the private world. My version of what Spider-Man looks like is different than your version, and my version of I don't know what Frodo and Bilbo look like is different than your version in your head. Until they make a movie.
Yeah, I agree with you there, Ethan.
Now I can't get Elijah Wood out of my head. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Except one thing, when I was watching the first Lord of the Rings movie in the theater, I remember, not out loud, but I was thinking to myself, Peter Jackson, you did it. Because I used to read the Lord of the Rings, still do as a matter of fact, just about every year, just because I love those books. And when I first saw The Shire on screen, when I first saw The Hobbits, when I first saw, the ring raids, everything, it was exactly as I pictured him. So Peter Jackson, he did a great job with that movie.
Yeah, he absolutely did. And I think, it was a Herculean effort. I mean, there's really no way that any filmmaker could have taken that on and not, rub some people the wrong way. I once had a conversation with a serious Tolkien scholar who, to a certain extent, really, there are many people who were opposed to having these things adapted because they just thought it was wrong. Like, this is a book. It should be a literary experience. And this guy was taking Peter Jackson to task because there's that scene at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring where Sam and Frodo run into the other hobbits in a big cornfield.
Right.
And this guy said, there was no corn in, Tolkien's world that he was evoking, and corn did not exist in even in Europe, up to a certain era.
Yeah.
And I thought, okay, you have to draw the line at some point. You can't be so obsessed by the details that it detracts. Like you're saying, if you buy it in the first 10, 15 minutes, you are there. You are absolutely there. You are sucked into it.
Then there's the opposite of that. It's like Romo said, he saw the Dungeons and Dragons movie, like I said, and he admits it publicly too. I never saw it because just from the trailers, I could tell that's not D&D. Yeah,
and there was a Saturday morning cartoon as well. That the Gary Gygax, the creator of D&D, for those who don't know, he went out to Hollywood. It was at the time when his company was, on the rise in the 1980s, and he went out there really trying to make deals and make money off of this thing. And it's like D&D becomes a Saturday morning cartoon. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I think that's the lure, unfortunately, of Hollywood, is that people think, here's finally my way to make a crap load of money. And of course, there's all kinds of compromises that get made because most Hollywood movies are being pitched to a general audience, to the lowest common denominator, and they have to get rid of a lot of the kind of cool, edgy stuff. That D&D movie is a good example, and countless others, that were just utter for the fan. Yeah, for the fan
we've had discussions on this show about what actually makes a geek, and we've even tried to make the distinction between a geek and a nerd. And it's pretty much the same, but. Well, I said one thing that really makes a geek is when you start defending whether it be a comic book, a sports team, whatever it is. That's when you know you're a geek.
I think you're absolutely right. You find yourself having these impassioned discussions. Anyone who looks at that from the outside is like, "What is up with these guys?" But as I was saying earlier, the parallel with sports. I mean, you get people hours and hours on talk radio talking about the Red Sox and this player and that player and this injury and this trade and. I mean, it's unbelievable. And, of course, fantasy football and fantasy baseball is a really excellent, I think, interesting development because I don't think that stuff would have existed weren't for
role-playing games.
Role-playing games to come, to sort of blaze that trail. I think fantasy football and baseball has been around for a long time. It's a kind of paper and pencil thing, but now through the internet, I mean, you can play out your fantasy of owning a team.
I don't play fantasy football or any of those, but I've seen people who do, and it is like when you and I used to keep the statistics for our characters. It's the same thing, but except it's for the players. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that for certain brains, not always the male brain, but typically the male brain, there's a real satisfaction in the stats, in the charts, and kind of quantifying things and kind of being able to crunch the numbers. And I can remember as a kid, just having crazy arguments with my players, and the dungeon master about how to interpret various rules, and it was all about. I think at the time it was sort of like a power thing as young teenage boys are trying to figure everything out about themselves and their bodies, and where can I sort of show dominance or knowledge or superiority.
Right.
But there's no surprise that a lot of people who play these games are into have careers in IT or are computer programmers. It's not to say that's the typical profile, but that certainly appeals to that kind of mind, I think, that wants to analyze and dissect.
Yeah, and the other thing is it's also not all males, right?
Absolutely not. Yeah, in fact, one of the surprising. I mean, when I played D&D, there were very few females who played, and certainly none who played with my group. That's changed a lot. I was surprised when I wrote my book, doing some of the research, to run across a study that said that in terms of online games, MMOs like World of Warcraft and all the rest, that the breakdown is about 60-40. So it's about 40% women who play, and about 60% men. And I was really surprised to hear that. And one of the things that I think has made these games more appealing to females is that there are more things to do in these game worlds than just run around and kill things. And, it's not just the appeal of the kill and the blood and the gore and, getting the treasure and leveling up. There's other things to do. You can craft, you can have conversations, you can hang out in the tavern and play music, you can, which I don't need to say that all women are attracted to that only, but that opens up another place for women to engage in these imaginary realms, that if the bloodshed and the leveling up is not really what turns them on. So that's a kind of exciting development, I think.